Now we gather here, standing within the very capital of his namesake, which holds our hope to change our lives, change our children's lives, and hope for the better. It is what represents us as faith-bearing people of this state, whether you have faith in religion or faith in the LGBT cause or faith in each other. One can accomplish nothing without faith in oneself. And when we find that we can no longer freely express our faith in ourselves, we find it necessary to speak out. Freedom to peacefully assemble with our voices unedited and our dignity intact. We welcome you to the first National Coming Out Day, State of Missouri 2011. Thank you all for coming and offering your support. National Coming Out Day was founded in 1988 by Robert Ichberg, a psychologist from New Mexico, and Jean O'Leary, an openly gay political leader from Los Angeles. On behalf of Personal Growth Workshop, the Experience in National Gay Rights Advocates, the date of October 11th was chosen because it was the anniversary of the 1987 National March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights. The first headquarters was located in West Hollywood, California, offices of the National Gay Rights Advocates. 18 states participated in the first National Coming Out Day, which was covered in the national media. In its second year, the headquarters moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and participants grew to 21 states. After a media push in 1990, National Coming Out Day was observed in all 50 states and 7 other countries. Participation continued to grow, and in 1990, National Coming Out Day merged their efforts with the Human Rights Campaign Fund. Plucky magazine presents a history of coming out, experiences spanning half a century and looking to the future of limitless possibilities. Being out in the public eye is not easy, and some politicians in Missouri and beyond must face this every day. I introduce you to Brian Greenwood, Executive Editor, with more on this.
Thank you, Josh. I've recently had the privilege of speaking with some politicians from Missouri who are not only out there to represent the people, but also the LGBT community as well. The first one I spoke to was Mike Colonna. He is the minority whip, a Democrat from the Tower Grove South area in St. Louis. He represents the 67th District, and he practices law in St. Louis on his time off. He also spends time with his partner and is active in the LGBT community. He came out in 1991, and he says his friends and family took it surprisingly well. And when it comes to the politicians he works with, they actually come to him with advice about the gay issues. And he says they are truly politically correct. I asked him about how being gay affected his political career, and he said it postponed it. He grew up in Jefferson County and went into law specifically to practice politics. It's something he's always been interested in, but he ended up practicing law instead of running for office. Once he got comfortable with himself, he found that being gay put him in a position to be a voice for the LGBT community in his district. It breaks down barriers rather than creates them, he says. He describes his job at the legislature as being the minority whip, as being the head banger. If the governor needs something done, he's the one that goes about and makes sure it gets done. If the governor doesn't want something done, he's the one who goes around and makes sure it doesn't get done. When it comes to same-sex marriage, he says that there's a debate in the LGBT community centering around this issue. If one doesn't support the legislation as a politician, one is seen as a traitor. But the community is split. He says you have to be realistic, and the Missouri Constitution bans marriage for same-sex couples. He is working on full equality and the same protection as heterosexual couples. He looks to Illinois as an example, who left it to the courts to decide and came up with civil union, the Missouri Non-Discrimination Act. He says the Republicans do what they can to break it down, but in reality it gains more and more sponsors every year. It means full faith and protection for the LGBT community in Missouri by default. And he wants to do this before he leaves office. He says there's also been good work on hate crimes against the LGBT community, and not falling back on these advances is important to him. As far as advice to the LGBT community interested in politics and just being out there in the public eye, he says, be yourself, be proud, be loud but not too loud, don't be embarrassed. As more people befriend the LGBT community, the issues will go away. We need to show the people across the aisle we are people, too. Equals in fact. Get out, get involved. Another Missouri legislator who is openly gay is Jeanette Oxford, also from St. Louis, who is happily partnered with Dorothy, who are both involved in the United Church of Christ. Jeanette also struggled with her sexual orientation before stepping into the public eye as a politician. She got advice from current politicians and her faith-based community. Her first try, she lost by 64 votes, but she didn't give up. She was later elected in 2004 and has since been a co-sponsor for MoMA, the Missouri Non-Discrimination Act, every year since then. She's active in the LGBT community with various voting rights and political groups that encourage the LGBT community to get out there and have their voice heard. She has faced discrimination as a politician in Missouri, with some of the fellow members finding her offensive. In fact, the Democratic caucus stood behind her despite this fact and put her as part of the committee even though she was not allowed to participate as a full official member. She also goes on to say that it would have been great to have gay-straight alliances when she was in high school. These alliances are integral in preventing suicide and reducing suicide rates in the LGBT community due to discrimination and bullying. She also plays the guitar and part of Dorothy writes songs. Together they sing and perform for different groups in the church choir. As far as advice is concerned, if you're considering running for office, talk to a number of elected officials. Make sure you have a track record of service to your community. The Victory Fund is a group specifically set up to train out LGBT candidates, which offers this advice. If you've ever been out anywhere, you better learn out, because someone will out you for you if you don't. Also, make sure you are open about your sexual orientation. She was prepared to answer questions, and the constituents respect it. Be honest, and people will elect you for you, or they won't elect you for you. Either way, you can go home happy with yourself knowing you didn't fake it. And finally, I had an interview with Republican presidential candidate Fred Carter, who is also openly gay, and he is breaking down barriers in the national sector because he is the first openly gay presidential candidate to run for the United States. And although he hasn't been allowed to participate in polls, mostly because he is openly gay and does not seem viable to the mass media, he is still out there making sure the message of the LGBT community is heard and that the issues are faced and not covered up. Now on to John, a personal story about LGBT discrimination and hate.
In Iowa, not too long ago, one of our lead correspondents from the state of Iowa had written this for the families of the community of Waterloo, Iowa, and we're going to read today. One Iowa, a marriage equality organization based in Iowa, is speaking about the recent hate crime that ended the death of a Waterloo, Iowa teen. Marcellus Richard Andrews, 19 years old, was pronounced dead at 3:30 p.m. on Sunday, August 21st, after being brutally beaten. Friday, Andrews was found unconscious with severe head injuries. He was attacked outside his friend's home by individuals taunting him, yelling "faggot," just before the attack. Andrews was captain of the local Union Missionary Baptist Church's Crusade School team, and at a performance on Saturday night, the team had a moment of silence in honor of Andrews. Previously, Andrews studied cosmetology at La James International College and was signed up to begin studying interior design at Plucky Community College. One Iowa released their statement about this tragedy with Troy Price, executive director, stating, "We are deeply saddened by the brutal and tragic death of Marcellus. This is just not something that happens in Iowa, and we are appalled at this level of extreme violence and intolerance. Tragedies like this underscore the incredible need to talk about issues affecting gay and lesbian Iowans, and to fight for equality in our communities when community, state, and national leaders ridicule gay and lesbians. It creates a hurtful environment and gives license to this sort of attack. Most importantly, it harms lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender young people by sending the message that they are not equal. We can and must do better, because we can never, ever allow an attack like this to take place in Iowa again." A similar statement was issued by the Executive Director of Iowa Safe Schools, Nate Monson. Iowa Safe Schools is an organization committed to creating safe environments and spaces for LGBT students. Monson states, "Andrew's tragic death points the crucial need for us to address anti-LGBT bullying in our schools, because sadly this is literally a life or death issue. We must ensure that LGBT children feel safe and supported in their school and community. Iowa Safe School is committed to creating a more safe and supportive state for all Iowa kids."
Thank you. I recently had the opportunity to speak with openly gay presidential candidate Fred Carver. One of the issues nearest and dearest to him is that of gay marriage. He will not settle for civil union. He says that gay marriage is a symbol, especially for the young people. And he equates it to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, where when the young African-American community realized that they finally had equality, finally had power, there was a rising up within that community, making it stronger from within. He says the same thing will happen to the openly gay community once it receives legitimacy of marriage. He's also very active in the HIV and AIDS campaign, in that he lived it, and a lot of young people who come out today don't actually have to face the reality of AIDS and what it used to be. He says people are cavalier nowadays. They don't understand what it's like to suffer, the stigma and the pain of HIV. It's time to educate people and get the word out. In fact, when Mr. Carver filed as a presidential candidate, he dedicated his filing to the 6 suicide victims, the LGBT teenagers who committed suicide earlier this year. He is very active in the discrimination and the hate crime factor that the LGBT community has to face. He wants to get the awareness out and tell kids, number one, that you're okay. He was recently in Utah and met with a young man who was beaten up and survived attempted murder. They put his chin on the curb and smashed his head in, hoping that his jawbone would go into his brain and kill him. He talked to a lot of the leadership there and the LGBT press about what to do. And he says ultimately we have to give very severe penalties to the perpetrators. On the issue of civil marriage or gay union, or civil marriage or civil union or gay marriage, Republican candidate Gary Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico, says that it should be up to the courts. The states have the right to say. Civil unions as a government sanctioned union, whereas gay marriage or all marriage should be put in the churches. He has no problem attending a church where gay marriage is accepted, but he would not make it a government issue. He would say civil unions is for straight and gay couples alike. It's about equality. It's not about telling people who they are and who they are not and what they cannot do. Shelley Wright, a famous country western singer, recently was in an interview on MSNBC where she was fresh off the picket lines in North Carolina. And North Carolina is one of the states considering a constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage. It will be the 32nd state to do so if it agrees to do so in May. She calls it a cynical, unnecessary political move to get out the conservative vote, because it's a hot-button issue, and the conservative right knows exactly, as we say in the South, what button to mash. And this is the button they like to push. They like to use a minority group, such as the LGBT people, as political pawns. She says this is essentially putting a deadlock bolt on the already locked door. This is a sucker punch to the LGBT community, and it's disgusting. She was recently picketing in North Carolina to prevent this vote from going to happen. And she was not only allied to the people in the streets, but also the senators in the state legislature. One of them, Doug Berger, a Democrat, compared this action in North Carolina to the rise of Adolf Hitler. He says, many of you may not realize that Adolf Hitler came power through the ballot box. And even though he was elected by the people, he was able to use the instruments of government to begin to take away the rights of individuals. If you were gay, you were required to wear a pink triangle to signify that you were a member of that despised group. And I believe if we pass this motion to concur, we are essentially putting a pink triangle in our state constitution. However, the news is not all bad. The majority of people in North Carolina don't agree with the idea of amending the state constitution over the issue of same-sex marriage. In a poll on September 7th, some 61% of North Carolinians say gay marriage should remain illegal, but 55% would vote against the constitutional amendment.
Telling me there's nothing wrong with you. So, I have absolutely run the whole gamut on this. I'm proud to be gay. My siblings all love me. My parents love me. And believe it or not, I still live in the same hometown I always wanted to live in. I didn't move away, and I'm still there today. And if I can help folks along the way, I genuinely do. And I think as part of humanity, that's what we need to do. So other than that, I guess I'll just turn it back over to Josh.
Ways to honor Marcellus Andrews. The murder has sparked community-wide debate about the definition of hate crime and whether the Andrews case falls under this definition. Nate Monson is the executive director of Iowa Safe Schools. Iowa Safe Schools is an organization dedicated to educating young youth-serving professionals about how language provokes violence. They provided service to victims of bullying and hate. Monson defines a hate crime as a crime with clear motive or hate. A hate crime is a crime that is targeting someone based on specific characteristics or traits. Police are refraining from calling the Andrews case a hate crime because they believe that there was bad blood between Marcellus and the attackers long before the murder. UNI Proud, a local student organization of the University of Northern Iowa, hosted a vigil in Cedar Falls, Iowa at the UNI campus. The group states that we felt it was important to come together to show the community that we were against bullying.